Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. Alrighty, I think we're good to go.
Alrighty.
Okay, great. Hi, this is Mike Tersini from Merchants Arena, and welcome to the webinar on the new Canadian anti-spam legislation and some alternative marketing strategies with my special guest, Dalia Astrabadi from RealSociable.com. Dalia is a fellow marketing expert and meetup organizer who continues to be recognized by different associations to consult and strategize on customer retention and customer segmentation. If you use email in your marketing, you've probably already heard of CASL, which is the acronym for Canada's anti-spam legislation. We're here to help you figure out the do's and the don'ts moving forward, and in plain English, without all the legal jargon, and answer any questions that you may have. And first of all, just a quick disclaimer, okay? This is intended to provide general comments on the new Canadian anti-spam law legislation. It's not intended to be a comprehensive review, nor is it intended to provide any kind of legal advice. Viewers should not act on information in this video without first seeking specific advice from their lawyer. And in short, we're not lawyers, and nor do we pretend to represent legal advice. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dalia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mike, for that introduction. I think as marketers and people who've used email, when we first heard of the CASL legislation, or the anti-spam legislation, in its early days, it put us in a position where we said we have to know. So we've sought a lot of legal counsel from various roles, different supporting positions, and we sort of summarized it. And the nice thing is our group here leads a meetup in the Toronto area. So if anyone's ever interested, do let me know. I'm going to just kick it off now with a little quick overview. So my role here is to just be as informative as possible. I'm trying to keep away from some of the details, but in our Q&A, if you have any questions, do let me know. And if I can't answer them directly, I'll make sure I direct you to someone who can. So, CASL has been an acronym tossed around for the last few months, and a lot of us, including post July 1st, got all those dreadful consent emails, and there's been a lot of do's and don'ts in the way those emails have been done. But the gist is really it's about building a new way of expression of getting permission marketing. And the way I like to position this is, regardless of where the consent lies, you as a marketer have a responsibility to create conversion. And I know the pressure is on ROI, but you really have to look beyond the numbers. We now have the opportunity to look at a real context-driven relationship system that can be applied with your day-to-day tactics. CASL really has been boiled down into two formal buckets. Those that you have a relationship with, whether those are contacts that are people who've already downloaded your product or subscribed to a different mailing list or have registered on your blog, and those that you don't have an existing relationship. This is where I think a lot of the gray area is rising. This includes LinkedIn, it includes Twitter, it includes phone calls, and it also includes how we prospect by building lists or using third parties to generate lists. In 30 seconds, we've helped a lot of our customers get CASL compliant, and we've boiled down simply sort of the key 4 steps to getting CASL compliant. One is identifying all your different assets, whether those are web or different third-party registrations, to make sure your disclaimer is visible and seeks consent. We've seen quite a few interesting emails that have come through. One from a firm that had a consent button on the registration in a very conspicuously view. Those are not allowed. You really have to make this visible, and we're now in a place where full disclosure is required. Step 2 is your content and engagement. A lot of people leverage gates when converting leads from their content or blogs or videos. Again, you have to make sure that there's full disclaimer there, and you can't use, a gamified approach. Sign up to an iPad, and that's a consent-driven notice. So, the guidance we've been given and have given back to our existing customers is look at the tone and make sure you're not providing any deception when trying to convert leads. In addition is your tools and templates. You remember the days where unsubscribes and putting our address on footers were an option. They are now mandatory. And they are mandatory even when sending to non-Canadian recipients. And so this puts a little bit more pressure when it comes to how we audit and manage all our email systems and our CRM, which is where step number 4 comes in, is in the audits. You must make sure you have a stamp and an audit trail. Being able to say, I've sent everyone an email and they've all said yes, is no longer capable. And there's some restrictions even in the email systems you are leveraging where full visibility to any analytics must be made available. So let's kind of talk about approved strategies. Last week or earlier this week, we had a post July 1st meetup. And for anyone who's interested, the meetup is called White CASL. And yes, that's not the burger joint, that is the Canadian anti-spam legislation, White CASL. Really, it was we had a very interesting dynamic. There was 3 main bulks of groups that were here to discuss bulk email. Those who were in the professional services, HR, recruitment, looking for leads for affiliates, so they are hired as an outbound sales team. The other were agencies who focus on building a lot of web and mobile apps that drive loyalty and brand recognition, which included a lot of social and sort of gamification or contests. And we call this the social play, and there has been a lot of changes to be made based on CASL. This is around the value-driven permission. You can't just use a social listening engine and look for anyone who wants a cup of coffee and solicit them all using social. And of course, there was a third group where focused on the legal and really wanted to make sure that they're not violating any ways of doing their outbound calling. And the gist of this all is we are now dramatically shifting to a more authentic, context-driven, and relevance-based framework. And the days of mass emails without identifying the root or the source of the lead could get you in trouble. And just as a heads up, I think as of Monday, there were already 1,000 complaints made based on CASL. So we'll get to the risks and some things that you need to be aware of based on our insight that we've learned. I think based on step 4, one of the things that were quite exciting is a lot of people put a lot of effort kind of trying to focus on how they're going to actually get this set up. If you use any email system provider like Vertical Response or HubSpot or Eloqua, or Constant Contact, there was a lot of emphasis on permission marketing, and the opt-in is good. One of the issues there was you don't know where the audit trail lies. So we were involved in a great initiative, whitecastle.com. If you're interested in seeing how they've automated the entire compliance and CASL compliance, they even have a really cool flow builder. So if you're ever in the position of looking at a new lead and you want to make sure, do you have consent or not, this is a great tool, and even some legal counsel have leveraged this. The other, as a segue into what we're doing on marketers and different sales relationships, is I would encourage you to look at the Marketer's Guide to CASL, which is really around focusing on the segmentation, the relationship management, and the authentic flow without diminishing the priorities around your tactics, high volume, conversion metrics, existing business. And so I'd encourage you to look at that. Before we kind of get into details, I wanted to focus on three great companies that have done a wonderful job getting to CASL excellence, as I say. Mercatus, which is a digital commerce provider for grocery chains, really took this as an opportunity to clean up and focus more on a relationship tailored system. You know, their focus on value gave them the reason not to consider having too many people go through different nurture tracks. And so they created a really wonderful method of how they do nurture programs, how they do engagement, how they leverage face-to-face meetings and drive new leads. And they haven't diminished the use of social. They've just taken it more on a value basis. The other is CASL, a great peer-to-peer marketplace. And because of that, they had a wonderful advantage of focusing on the local community and generating lists just without context were not really a big contributor to their business. And so I would welcome you to look at them and see how they've been able to leverage peer-to-peer networks to grow their user base. And of course, Me2We Style, which is a promotional company affiliated with Free the Children, who's not only always had a socially responsible role, but again, they took this as an opportunity to look at their commerce engine and how it relates to their existing day-to-day sales tactics and how they leverage real business insight and now look for referrals to drive this, which, by the way, is outside CASL. So with that being said, you know, there's a lot of new marketing strategies that could be leveraged, mostly around communications and prospecting. If we look at the core, and at Real Social, we always say, get back to basics. You know, everything that we learned from the modern era around getting a genuine referral in by congratulating someone on a business milestone and having the opportunity to connect with them, giving them a nugget around their business that they will want more. You know, we call this the positively influenced stage. And sometimes, you know, with the pressure of the funnel and high volume email, we've skipped that step because we are looking for metrics like opt-ins or downloads. But if we kind of take a step back and look at what these alternative ways of looking at conversion, there's a lot of methods. So if we can't purchase a list, we can certainly ask our top customers to reference their top 3 people that they think would be great potential buyers for us. If we now can't prospect in bulk and do, you know, mass social listening and downloads and solicit to them there, let's look at the real context and how we can leverage social. If we can't use third-party affiliates, and again, the disclaimer here is different third parties have built different CASL compliant methods to be able to continue doing affiliate marketing. So I wouldn't say this is a blanket statement, but now be very aware that the responsibility around leveraging anyone to communicate on behalf of your company needs to be fully disclosed. And so the don'ts now aren't by, you know, leveraging 2, 3, 4 different companies to try to create lead gen. And of course, social media exhaustion. Social media is a great utility to coverage and also get inbound leads as long as you take a genuine approach. It's a different communication channel. And just like email, we don't want to ever massively write statements that we don't think the recipient will have any relevance. And that's really what I think, as a marketer's point of view of CASL, is it's removing the spam. And unfortunately, in the B2B and businesses, we have a gray area in how that interprets with our mass emails. And, it's really now getting back to some unique strategies. So that really leads to an advantage. Take this opportunity and look at how you target and use 360-degree views of your existing relationships and how you want to translate that to targets. Start looking at brand interests, like different targeting, different content, different channels. And again, just because solicitation on social may be, fine line, this doesn't mean you can't grow your community. Third is your channel coverage and your persona segments. Take the opportunity to identify which targets may prefer specific communication channels. This is a really great way to look at right time, right place, right channel. We've done that with a lot of our customers who realize whether CASL was here or not, the course they were taking not only prevented them from violating any CASL principles, but it also actually grew the conversion process. And again, leverage evangelism and local support. This is really about generating new ways to grow your community, and let your sweet spot be that first area. It's around context, relevance, and timing. And then really gets down to new toolkits. I think one of the really interesting things about taking the approach of a next generation, communication strategy is looking at more pure relationship-driven models. If you aren't familiar with social prospecting, it's certainly a good time to look at, where you can have timely insight on your leads that could really generate business context. And, I can share with you afterwards a few charts and things that we've done that look at the mapping of social engines. And this is also available in the CASL board, and how it applies to CASL compliance. Your new toolkits like community-based insights. Take a look at company news. This is the time to really connect the dots. So your nurture programs and your different tracks are not based on, high volume first touch points, but on the referrals and the conversions. And again, analysis. Great tools out there, and I'm sure in the Q&A we'll drive them through. Just want to point again around the referrals. Referrals have always been the best way to grow your business. And with CASL, they actually are outside CASL. And with some of the different exemptions you get, leveraging communications with business connections in or references, this is really the time to evaluate what social prospecting can do. A quick little example is, if you have your best customer, as we say, champion, and how he influences different people in your community, you having visibility to that really allows you to have a dial in to that person, whether it's by phone or email, and that increases your probability of conversion. Another really good example is if you're someone who's had a hard time keeping conversion, and there's different retention, and you've been using different outbound tactics and hiring third parties to create advertising. That's one element. The truth is, if you are able to get visibility to, again, the dynamics, or what we call the triggers, you are now able to genuinely prepare email communications that are specific to that individual. And again, CASL compliant, that allows you to reach at the right time and generate highest response rate. So in summary, I really wanted to focus in on the communications within Canada. The rule states that CASL, as a Canadian business, must follow all CASL requirements if you are sending it to a Canadian recipient. The rule also stipulates that if you're sending it to someone outside of Canada, you must follow the local or the national spam policy. So this is also a bit unique if you're an international vendor. We have a list of all, I think, 25 different privacy policies. So if anyone is interested, we'd be happy to send that over. The source of the relationship status is key. It triggers all the requirements that you need for audits, but also gives you the confidence to whether you're actually following the right principles. The certain use cases can be looked up on the different resource guides we mentioned, but feel free again to reach out to our team if you need more information. So in summary, here's the 10 steps that I'd like to share with you. It's one, define your contact flow. Understand where you're generating your leads, where they're potentially being abandoned, and start looking at real value segments to consider new channels of lead generation. Step two is understand those segments clearly and review the data requirements so that you make sure that you know whether you are violating any CASL needs. And then again, get your CRM ready. All of the tactical plans lead you to make sure that you have the date stamps, you have the confidence. One of the unique things that I think have put more scare in this is in the violations and the fees. You know, the sender is at risk, the officers of the company are at risk, the marketing director is at risk. And so you want to make sure that there is no place in your engagement in your organization that these violations may occur. And of course, track your consents. Once you feel confident, you can introduce all these new methods in a very simple and new way that doesn't have to halt your business. And with step 7, review your metrics. Metrics are always a great way of understanding whether you are advancing to your goals. Step 8, know your social exhaustion limits. One of the biggest questions we get are the gray areas with CASL regarding Twitter, LinkedIn and InMail, and other social networks. Being connected to one another on a social network does not give you express consent. So just be mindful of that if you are someone who uses any InMail campaigns or listening tools to solicit through mentions on Twitter. Step 9 is measure results, not data points. You know, one of the customers I worked with were so afraid of the 14,000 emails that they were sending on a monthly basis. But when we focused on the actual results, we noticed on average 50 to 60% of those emails were never and consistently never receiving emails. So once they applied this CASL strategy and they realized it's not necessarily the volume, but it was in the segmentation, they increased their conversion rates. And now they have a 30% conversion process and a reduced abandonment rates. Learn from high value contacts. I think getting ready for CASL means we need to get ready for a more genuine way of engaging. And if you take a look at the different methods, whether you use telephone, voicemail, email, lists, events, there is a clear difference between one where you have a need to engage, and most of those actually end up falling around implied consent, and two, those that you are not aware of. I used to have this common saying when I was, 6 years ago when I was presented with the early days of privacy conversations. And one of the things I always said to people is, we as people generally never complain if we're solicited to on things that we really need. It's always when we are solicited to something we don't want, we don't know how we were picked to be presented to, that makes us feel uneasy, and that's where we typically fail. And this is a good opportunity to look at the right methods in reviewing your relationship and how to grow. And that's all for me at Real Social and working with both White Castle and While if you're in the Salesforce ecosystem. If there's any questions, I'd love to kickstart that and go from there. Thank you.
Oh, that's great, Dahlia. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
What about question here. What about people who have been using, they've been buying lists and they've been mailing out on these lists, right? So they're wondering if they can continue to do this without, really, the person has never opted in to receive the message. But some people are under the impression that this is implied consent because they're not expressing their dissatisfaction in the process. But my guess is that this is not a compliant type of list that you can be continually marketing to.
Yeah, this is not an initiative I'm working on or anyone I know, but the way I like to express what consent means is, imagine you and I, Mike, had this wire between us that was a secure authentication that gives us the ability for us to have a sender and recipient relationship. Imagine this as the way consent will be used across companies. Your book of business will now become more relevant. So if you recognize, if you think there's this bind between what a consent-driven relationship is, me buying a list from an affiliate I have no affiliation with, my customers don't have an affiliation with, is non-CASL compliant. And just because they may have had implied consent with the third party, you have to make sure that, just like step 2 in the CASL guide, you have to make sure there's full disclosure if anyone is going to be sending any communications on your behalf. And I think this is where it becomes very important, because the way you can complain on that Fight Spam, I think .ca site, is based on companies, not the third parties or who sold you the list. And I think this is something very important. Is it's just like the disclosure and the disclaimers that all different vendors are making. Just because you signed up to my social network, you are governed by the private club rules that I put in my terms and conditions. I am in no means being responsible to govern any different local laws that you may be presented with. And I think this is something you should know very carefully. This is a govern yourself accordingly method.
Yeah, I think the segmentation and really trying to build the quality of your list is really just more important than ever, because who wants to send out emails to people that don't want them? If you met somebody at an event and you received verbal permission to send them an email, that is basically good enough. But there's a certain time limit, isn't there, on how long you can contact them before they have to actually opt in or confirm an opt-in. Is that right?
This is a really good question, because there has been a lot of different variations of what a business card exchange is. A lot of lawyers are providing counsel that says make them go to an area where they express consent. A business card exchange is a implied consent based on disclosure. So, I don't know anyone who exchanges business cards that says keep it as a souvenir. So, there has been a lot of counsel around what is actually expressed in that business card exchange, or whether you actually have to show them a site to get the express consent. I think before we kind of get to this, I really want to share what the difference between implied consent is and express consent is, without getting into what applies where. Express consent is like getting a final sign-off on that authentication that I referenced. So if you think about it, getting an express consent means you have their express consent to communicate with them indefinitely unless they unsubscribe. And this is very different from a lot of the implied consent requirements where you have 2 years from that date of the implied consent to actually seek express consent formally, or you lose the ability to indefinitely communicate with them. So I don't know if that is clear. So what a lot of times people say is, let's say you register and get a trial on our website. That registration is an existing relationship, but the date you formally engage is the date the ticker starts.
Right.
And as a principle for segmentation and how you want to continue different communication strategies, if you wait to the last minute to seek express consent, this is where you're at risk because that transaction may evolve into a non-existing relationship. That transaction may shift into something else, and you don't have the communication path to understand that they are now an express consent. So it really comes down to the audit, but also identifying that the ultimate goal is having everyone in your system get an express consent as long as you do it in a genuine way. So back to the business card exchange. This is a very normal B2B way of saying, give me a call. Now, when you get that exchange, just be wary that the date you made the business card exchange and that exchange dialogue needs to be audited. So in the event, you need to save the business card. You need to prepare the email of knowing the business connection, and that needs to be in your CRM. And so that is just where I think a lot of people are getting mixed up. A lot of counsel is go and send them to a site where they get express consent, because therefore you won't need to worry about these dates. And so it's really a matter of coming down how you want to audit things.
That goes for verbal consent as well, where the call in most cases should actually be recorded. And then you run into the whole can of worms of, well, you can't record conversations without permission. So sort of a catch-22 there. If you are using the phone to get implied consent in order to convert them to express consent, you run into a little bit of an issue there, because you're supposed to have a recording of the conversation. Isn't that right?
Well, I think that's the other thing is you need to have the audit trail. Getting express consent by telephone is acceptable. Getting the audit trail is important. I think recording them unwillingly is not, that's violating another law. So it is a catch-22, as you say. Although I will say that the whole Sterling issue, or the Clippers, what was his name, is something that might set precedents that you don't need permission to record someone. But I wouldn't recommend that. I would just say, what are the different elements that you need? Maybe it's creating a form on your website. This White CASL initiative is a full audit automation that is in your CRM, which means if I'm on the phone with you and I have the events and the follow-up that says thank you for the call, that may be good enough. And again, we haven't seen from the CRTC or anywhere where the audit requirements may, where the gray areas. But I think at the end of the day, if you're being transparent around where the sources and the methods of whether they were implied consent or express consent are being generated, I think that is a respectable way to continue, and I don't think you'll put yourself at risk of any violation.
Yeah, I think, and I'm also under the impression that working on the other areas, because everybody seems to be so concerned about this as a method of prospecting. So people were sending out raw emails to people that they didn't know as a prospecting measure in order to get people to start a communication or dialogue, or see if they could do business with them. So I think, setting up systems where you have a referral system set up.
This is a good time to look at your content and how you create business connections. At Real Social, we've been saying this for close to a year, is leverage sales triggers as your method to communicate with someone. If I called you, Mike, and said, Mike, we're both neighbors and we used to work at the same company, whether I bought your name or not, would that necessarily raise a flag? No. And again, I think this is, there is the letter of the law guideline on how you want to enrich your communication strategy or your demand generation to hit more genuine, authentic ways of getting conversion. If I used to call this the margin of error in the sales funnel, and I've been in marketing automation for a while. And sometimes we want to get things out the door, and then we put a lot of pressure on getting as many people on top of the funnel, because those who fall along the way may still give me a decent number to work with at the bottom. Let's kind of take that and flip it around and say, what if I only wanted to start with 50 and I have a reason to communicate with those 50 on a very contextually and timely basis? What would that do to my sales approach? What would that do in growing a different communication plan? And that actually, when you think about it, could be a wonderful program that now introduces you to different social and email, and so it's and blogs and content. So this might be a way to accelerate your sort of next generation strategy, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, because people aren't concentrating on the middle point of once they get somebody in, and really concentrating on the middle point in order to nurture the relationship and make it work that way. There's a question here about, because I think, as far as I know, it's still a gray area, is like LinkedIn InMail and sending email through different social media situations. Like you and I are organizers for meetups, and I know that within meetups you can email or contact the people. You don't really have direct access to their actual email address, and there is the option of them opting out of that feature where they cannot get contacted with messages if they don't want to. They can opt out and do that. So is something like that compliant, and would InMail still be considered compliant or not?
So this one, InMail is a messaging system within the context of LinkedIn.
Right.
Now, I know LinkedIn had produced a statement a few weeks ago regarding this, and they are working on providing any guidance or whether they will be putting any regulation within the application. But before I get to that question, and the lawyers who we worked with really define it as LinkedIn is a private club, built on the internet. And I know that sounds so rudimentary, but they are not in play of creating any compliance requirements with different legislation. You contributing and being having a connection with someone on LinkedIn is in the virtue of the land or sort of the domain that you created. It doesn't necessarily give you any indirect consent. But by saying that, InMail, if I were to send you a message, because don't forget, the one-on-one emails are not part of CASL. It's that's the gray area, but it typically wouldn't. Again, if I were to send you a message on email or text or even a voicemail that is directed to you, that's outside CASL. It's those mass emails that come through InMail that have to be carefully sought out. I personally received 2 of them this week, and that was my gesture to them, is just because there is a connection, it doesn't mean you can send me an electronic communication message.
Yeah, so it used to be that you could send a company an email and basically just to introduce yourself as an introduction, and now you cannot do that without some kind of consent.
And this is where there's two methods. Again, you get in exemptions if you have a referral or a business connection. So
Right.
this is where, there's powerful opportunities for LinkedIn or Real Social for anyone who has been kind of building more context insight within their organization. Because, like I said before, I can send you an email or an in-mail, but as long as I put in the referral or the business connection, it's technically outside CASL because I'm not saying, Mike, I'm in the business of selling coffee. I think you should buy my coffee. That kind of solicitation is where it's definitely gray area and CASL compliant, not CASL compliant. But me reaching out to see you saying we have customers in common, we went to the same school. I just noticed that you opened an office in Toronto and this would be a great time for us to say hi to each other. If you respond to me, I now have implied consent. Doesn't mean you have express consent, but you have an implied consent. The other form of implied consent that a lot of people don't speak about is the conspicuously published form of disclosure. So if you find me on the websites and I have said, like I would here, I'm expert at social prospecting and leveraging CASL to continue to grow your business. Call me. I have conspicuously published that for you to be able to generate my name as a lead through that consent.
Right.
So this is really important to notice. It doesn't mean you can now engage in bots that scrape emails. Again, you may be violating far more laws than just CASL. So just be wary of that. I mention this because this is where you can really introduce a new mix, right? You notice something, you tweet them, you might get a response, you then send them an email, and now you actually have what would have been a non-existing relationship that is now converted to an it's far more relevant and important to your business that way than just getting the name.
It's also smart if you market to the people that you've already made sales to, because you have like 2 years, right? Or is it 3?
Well, we all have 3 years to get the express consent. And again, there's this whole, what was required at by July 1st? What was required by July 1st, 2017? What is the term of 6 months versus 2 years? I think, the 2 years is the marker of where your implied consents need to shift into your express consent. And the way we discuss this is you need to then at that point get a formal express consent. It's the 3 years is where you need to be in compliance with the express consent. But I would not pay that much attention because if you notice, most of the law firms and, we're sending out express consent emails prior to July 1st. They weren't trying to maintain a database that they had existing consent of both express and implied. They were trying to reduce the amount of work that will happen between now and 2017. Because like I mentioned before, an express consent is like a sign off on express indefinitely. So the segmentation part is, you may have a ton of customers, but because they haven't given the language of express consent, you may now have to create several initiatives over the course of the next year to get them to get that express consent. And I think this is just really the difference, is knowing whether you're seeking the express consent because you're building an initiative where that becomes the solid list, or you're building an express consent campaign because you have, you have identified their name in a way that is not within CASL. So it's just being wary of that.
That's correct.
So direct mail is not part of this legislation. In fact, someone in our meetup group represents Canada Post, who encourage people to leverage Canada Post as a way, whether that's a gift or a non-gift. I'm not really certain. My only concern is if you're going to use any gifting service that generates a electronic message as a confirmation, you are in violation of CASL if they are not express. So be very careful of that. I am a fan of old school, old fashioned methodologies. You can read my blog around getting back to basics and old fashioned techniques to drive conversion. But one of the issues I say is, at the end of the day, seeking someone's address and sending them a letter of solicitation, in my opinion, is perceived to be a more private, invasive method than giving them a call. I do think, though, it's a nice way to leverage different engagement tactics, and it's on a use by case basis. But do beware of how an electronic message can be transferred. The truth is, you can probably send them a big care package at home with a box of 100 solicitations, and it's okay. And I don't mean to be facetious there, but this is where you have to say, you can't create any deceptive or recursive way in how you want to solicit your business.
Right.
A nice thing I would say is one of the things I was talking about yesterday is leveraging. LinkedIn now allows you to publish, and how you want to build communities. I think this is a great way to build communities, and it's not an easy skill, and I think it's also the best way to create express consent. And so, it doesn't mean you will likely reduce the number of emails. It's just the sources will become particularly different.
Yes, and I totally agree that participating in and even creating your own groups in LinkedIn and Google Plus can really help in your prospecting.
I completely agree.
So people shouldn't be all freaked out.
Just be wary and make sure you have an audit trail. And I think if you have an expansive budget to do that on a regular basis, you can hire different agencies who put out offerings. But I would encourage you to check out White CASL. I've seen companies get CASL compliant now within 15 minutes, and that confidence to make sure they're continuing their business without interruption. So definitely do that.
All right, we're approaching the top of the hour. Please let us know how people can get in contact with you.
They can, with consent, everyone can email me at Dalia, Dalia, at realsociable.com. They can find me on LinkedIn. They can also go to realsociable.com and, check one of the forms with consent, and we will get back to you.
All right, Dalia, I want to thank you again for joining me today and everyone who took the time out of their busy schedule to attend live. So thanks a lot for attending. This video recording will get out to you as soon as possible. Okay, thanks, Dalia.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
You bet. Thank you.
Bye now.